Welcome to the Resource Nexus podcast. As always, you can check out the full article along with stats and opinions at theresourcenexus.com. Before this season even began, a reader reached out and asked me if I would do a roster value breakdown for Kentucky, similar to what I did earlier in the offseason for North Carolina. That UNC article, which dissected a roster reportedly costing around $14 million in NIL, was well received because it challenged the assumption that top 5 spending automatically equals a top 5 roster, or in UNC's case, even a top 25 roster. I laid out why I didn't believe UNC's investment aligned with actual talent and highlighted more efficient transfer targets. Guys like Chad Baker-Mazara, PJ Haggerty, Jason Edwards, or even the cheaper ones like Jamel Jones, Will Johnston, Scotty Middleton, and Jalen Celestine. All players who ultimately landed at mid or lower tier Power 5 programs such as USC, Kansas State, Providence, and Cincinnati. Players that should have been available to a blue blood like UNC with deep pockets. The concept was simple. Value matters, even in the NIL era. Naturally, that same reader asked me, why don't you do this for Kentucky too? Their NIL budget was just reported at $22 million. At the time, I thought that number was wildly disproportionate to the roster's actual quality. I stopped short of writing a critical piece because, even with the massive overpay, my model still had Kentucky ranked 6th nationally in the preseason. That ranking was mostly driven by one player, Otega Oweh, who graded out as the 6th best returning player in the country. I figured it's hard to be overly harsh about a team that's in my top 10, even if for that price tag, they should probably be first. My thinking was it would have been a rehash. Many of the same top transfers in my model would appear in any article, and those were already my value guys. It seems like years ago now, but Kentucky did beat Purdue in an exhibition after this suggestion. But fast forward to now, after a 35-point loss to Gonzaga in essentially a home game in Nashville, it's time to lay it all out. This roster is a disaster, structurally, financially, and strategically. And every issue I flagged months ago, every structural problem, it has unfolded exactly as expected. The preseason red flags. An overpriced, poorly constructed roster. When I evaluated Kentucky before the season, I told the reader exactly this. Yes, this is a massive overpay for $22 million, and no, I don't like the Low Williams Aberdeen overpays, all relative to the money they must have spent. I said that because my model and common sense simply didn't support the national hype surrounding several players. Here's where Kentucky's roster ranked in my preseason model, including incoming freshman projections, preseason rankings in our model. These are based off last year's statistical profile versus strength of schedule for those returning college players or that played internationally. The freshmen are just a projection of where we thought a player in their consensus range would usually fall based on past season. The thing with freshmen is it's the most hit or miss talent pool to recruit from. 6, Otega Oweh. 68, Jayden Quaintance. 83, Mohamed Dioubat. I thought this was one of the more underrated signings of the offseason for Kentucky. Unfortunately, he has only played in 5 of the 9 games so far. 151, Jalen Lowe. 179, Brandon Garrison. I thought was a solid player to bring back in the right role. You wanted that continuity with Oweh. In theory, it should have helped to have at least 2 rotation players returning. That knew what Pope wanted. 182, Andrei Jelovic from his Eurostat translations. 415, Jasper Johnson projected. 450, Malachi Moreno projected. 468, Denzel Aberdeen. 818, Cam Williams. These rankings are objective, reflecting production, efficiency, strength of schedule, athletic translation, and statistical profiles across all comparable players. Immediately, several glaring problems were obvious. The Cam Williams problem, a transfer misread as a breakout star. All offseason, I've said the hype around Cam Williams never made sense. He was a 9.3 per game, 4.5 per game, 15.2 player efficiency rating role player in 32 minutes at Tulane against a 150 level SOS, and he couldn't elevate that team despite ample opportunity. Tulane was ranked 144th last year, and he was the fifth option at 13% usage, effectively a non-factor on a team that needed more juice. He wasn't above average even there. Yet somehow he appeared highly ranked on national transfer lists and mock NBA draft boards. It was absurd. My model had him 818th, a bad fit, poor value, and a player who has shown no ability to level up to SEC competition. Yet Kentucky treated him like a premium asset. He was, in reality, the definition of a massive overpay. The Denzel Aberdeen overpay, a role player elevated to high usage. The moment Kentucky paid him, I said, Aberdeen is a massive overpay for what is essentially a role player. Now, he's the starting point guard. If you told me in July this roster would revolve around Aberdeen running the offense, I would have said, Kentucky is in trouble. Serious trouble. To his credit, he's played better than I expected, which ironically is even scarier. Even with Aberdeen overachieving, the team is getting demolished. Regression is coming. His scoring and efficiency numbers are absolutely due to fall against real competition. Kentucky's SOS so far is only around 45th. If Aberdeen is your bright spot, that's a catastrophic sign. The Jalen Lowe bet, high usage with low efficiency. My model ranked Lowe 151st, far lower than most places because inefficient, high-usage guards rarely scale well. Yet he's one of the only true creators, so he's forced into a role he isn't optimized for. Kentucky needed a clean, disciplined initiator. Instead, they paid for an inefficient volume guy and built the roster around him. That should have been clear looking at Pitt last year. The Jayden Quaintance gamble. Paying premium for a distressed asset. This one baffles me the most. You are Kentucky. Why pay top NIL money for a player coming off a major ACL injury? That's the definition of a distressed asset. Even if he returns at 85%, which is optimistic, the team already loses at least a third of the season. The roster lacks the structure to support a recovering player like him. This is exactly the kind of risk elite programs are supposed to avoid, not double down on. The reality, a dysfunctional roster before playing a game. Even with my doubts, I still ranked Kentucky 6th preseason, assuming full health for Quaintance, and because Otega-Owe is that good. The structural flaws now, no true point guard, no spacing, no high IQ initiator, no lineup synergy, several overpaid, low-value transfers, a risky rehab project treated like a sure thing. And the shooting collapse is shocking. Last year, 28th nationally in three-point percentage and 44th in makes. This year under Mark Pope, 250th in three-point PET percent and 119th in makes. For a $22 million roster, that is almost unimaginable. The Gonzaga game, the breaking point. A 35-point loss in what was essentially a home game is not just a bad night, it's a structural failure. This roster does not work. It was overpriced and misbuilt from day one. $22 million gone wrong in almost every conceivable way, and the next highest paid rosters closer to 14 or 15 million. The pressure on Mark Pope is enormous. This is not fixable. Even with Aberdeen overachieving and even with Lowe backplaying, even with Otega-Owe still being star quality, even with Quaintance waiting in the wings, Kentucky is getting worse, not better. This roster was a massive overpay, built on distressed assets, inefficient guards, and mispriced transfers, lacks spacing, synergy, and the baseline architecture of a top 10 team. Never made sense on paper, worse on the court. This is a $22 million disaster, and it's only December. At this point, the realistic goal for Kentucky should be simply making the NCAA tournament and hoping the team is playing well enough to pull off a Calipari-style run to the second weekend. There is still talent, enough, for example, to beat Purdue in an exhibition, but the ceiling has been lowered by poor construction and fit. If Mark Pope loses this team and it snowballs into anything less than a tournament appearance, he's essentially a dead man walking. Maybe not immediately this spring, but next season he will be under immense pressure to deliver a top 10 team that advances to at least the second weekend just to start repairing faith with Kentucky fans. You don't recover from a season like this without instilling confidence in the fan base. And with $22 million in NIL resources, the failure is that much more glaring than even your typical blue blood, more in the $14 million range. Even for North Carolina, I worried if Hubert Davis could survive being given $14 million and not being a top 25 team. At Kentucky, that is amplified. Of course, Pope had goodwill build up from last year, but Hubert had went to the national championship in his first year, and you see how hot his seat was. What should have been an easy spring at a blue blood program has become a full-blown crisis. Pope now has to find a way to salvage this, and honestly, I really did think he was a good coach. There was nothing in his profile that suggested a season could go off the rails quite like this. He had 3 top 20 Ken Pom teams at BYU, and 2 of those were in the West Coast Conference, which makes it even more impressive. And all of that was before NIL reshaped the sport. To me, that resume was absolutely worthy of the Kentucky job. My thinking going in was that maybe the numbers were telling me something different about this group. Not that I believed that fully, but I did leave a small window of possibility open. Maybe Lowe was better than I anticipated. Not Cam Williams, though. The idea that he was some kind of lottery pick level transfer the national folks were hyping, that never made sense to me. But I still left some allowance that I could be wrong. I was actually higher on Kentucky than most people in Pope's first year, and that ended up paying off. This year is obviously different, and he better figure out a way to get this team into the NCAA tournament, because as of today, they sit 39th in the net. There's a lot of work to be done. If they don't at least make the tournament, anything is possible. Now, I do think Pope would return, even if they narrowly miss the field. But this is a fan base and a university that does not mess around. Billy Gillispie was gone after 2 years, and he didn't even have a season as good as Pope's first one. But let's be real. If Kentucky truly tanks and falls out of the top 100, all bets are off. Right now, this team feels like it's at a crossroads, a point where some guys could shut it down, pack it in, or start playing just to protect themselves. Or worse, for their own stats. We're going to find out really fast where this is headed. Stay tuned. All right, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you got some good insights. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who'd find it useful. And don't forget to check out theresourcenexus.com for more in-depth analysis. Until next time, check you later.
Cool. Guess we'll see you around.
All right, check you later.
Bye.
Wait, man, why are you always such a dork, man?
What are you talking
Check you
about?
later. Check you later.